Hello and welcome to this webinar about data on migration organised by CESSDA. I'm Jen Buckley and I work for the UK Data Service, and I'll be joined by two speakers today. We've got Kitty Limperopoulos from the University of Manchester and Reinhard Chung from GESIS, Leibniz Institute for Social Research. We also have Anna Schwipper from GESIS to chair our question and answer session. Here's an overview of the webinar. So I'll start with a brief introduction to CESSDA and finding data through national data services in Europe. Then we'll have Kitty, who's a researcher in the UK, and we'll talk about some of the different sources of data available on migration, how they can be used, and some of the challenges you find when using the data. We'll then have Reinhard, who will talk about some of the important data sources that are available from GESIS. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions. So CESSDA, the organisation behind this webinar, and for those of you who don't know, it's the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives. And CESSDA aims to enable the research community to conduct some high quality research, and tasks underlying this vision include developing standards and best practices around the management and archiving of social science data, and facilitating access to important data resources. So the core operational bodies in CESSDA are national data services and archives, so you may be familiar with the data service in your country or some of the larger data services such as GESIS. These organisations provide access to extensive collections of data useful for social and economic research. Each archive's collection is unique, but quantitative data is most common, particularly data from social surveys, and therefore social science archives are a really key source of individual level data. Some archives include qualitative research outputs, and sources of data can include major collaborative studies, official government and policy orientated research, and also research, small research projects and individual researchers. Collections can include current data. The processing time and the needs of data collectors can mean data is not available for some months after data collection, and there's also older data collections too. So here are just a few examples of some of the data types you might find. So there are many general social surveys or public opinion surveys. Countries in the EU also organise labour force surveys, which collect detailed information about employment, training and income. And there are longitudinal studies such as household panel studies to allow the analysis of change at the individual level. Many European countries participate in international survey research programmes, and you can also find studies relating to specific topics such as migration. And Kitty and Reinhard will talk more about sources useful for studying migration. So you can find information and links for many of Europe's social science data archives on the CESSDA website. And to help you find data, national data services have websites with online catalogues like this one for the Swedish National Data Service. You can search using terms such as migration, and sometimes you can browse by topic. So with large archives, you can get many results, but usually you can find ways to sort and refine your searches. So for example, here I've filtered by survey data. Websites and catalogues are mostly in national languages and English. However, data and documentation might only be in one language. If you find you don't get any results, one strategy is to think about your search terms. So for instance, lots of useful data for examining migration topics might come from studies not specifically focused on migration. So for example, for migrant labour market outcomes, you may want to focus on identifying data on employment and then checking to see if you can identify migrant status. At the moment, all the CESSDA archives have separate catalogues, but not for long. So this summer, CESSDA will launch the CESSDA Data Catalogue, and this new tool will allow you to search across all CESSDA member archives. And there'll be features such as free text searches and also ways to sort and filter results. And the results will include a summary of the data and then link you through to the relevant archive. Once you've found useful data, how do you go about accessing it and getting started? So access arrangements vary a bit across the different data services and also across different data collections. And here are a few of the arrangements you might come across. So first, there are some open data collections that any type of user can download without registering. But usually you need to register with the data service before accessing data, and you may also need to register the use of data. You will usually be agreeing to terms and conditions as part of the registration process or when accessing data. Common terms and conditions can include not trying to identify individuals, households or organisations in the data, and not distributing data to others. Some restrictions about the use of data are also common. So, for example, data being for non-commercial use only or for use in research or teaching only. Often you download data directly from the catalogue. However, some services ask users to complete a form to request data. In some cases, access may require permission from the data owners, and therefore an additional stage in the access procedure. And more strict applications generally operate for any data collections considered to contain sensitive or confidential data. To facilitate access to confidential data, some services will operate things like dedicated safe rooms or also accessed via remote services. Access to data documentation and metadata is generally free. Charges can apply though for some commercial use and for supplementary services such as burning data to a CD. You should find the access conditions displayed clearly in the catalogue for each data collection. And finally, for any secondary data analysis, you need to make sense of the data by finding out what information was collected, from whom, when and where, and what was done to the data before you get it. And you should find this information in the catalogue record and supporting documentation, which might include user guides, survey questionnaires, interview schedules, and fieldwork notes. So documentation is often accessible directly from the catalogue as fully searchable PDF documents, though the format and quality can vary, especially for older studies. But if you're ever unsure, you can always ask the relevant data service for help. So that's a brief introduction to CESSDA and Social Science Data Archives, and I'm now going to pass you over to Kitty for her presentation.
Thank you, Jen. The aim of the first part of the webinar is to provide an overview of data sources for international migration in the UK and highlight some of the strengths and limitations. There are many data sources that measure the characteristics of international migration to and from the UK, as well as the volume and characteristics of migrants resident in the UK. Taken individually, none of the data sources provide a complete, accurate picture about immigration. The UK Census of Population and a variety of survey and administrative sources are used to measure the stocks and flows of international migrants, each having the limitations. These data sources include the Census of Population, the Labour Force Survey, and the International Passenger Survey, both of which are regularly updated large-scale surveys. National Insurance Number registrations, GP registrations, both derived from administrative sources. Other data sources include Home Office immigration and asylum statistics, which cover immigrants subject to immigration controls, and higher education statistics, which record information on students whose usual residence is outside the UK. I will cover some of these data sources in this session. You can find out information about other data sources from the Office for National Statistics and the Open Government data websites shown here. Before we look at these data sources in more detail, we will look at how migrants are captured in data sets. A migrant is usually defined as a person whose country of birth or nationality is different to the country of residence. Another commonly used definition of a migrant is a person who changes his or her country of usual residence for a particular time period, typically for a period of over 12 months. Depending on the data set you use, the definition of migrant is likely to be different. Migration estimates by nationality and country of birth may not be in agreement, as they classify migrants differently. So, for example, British nationals born abroad or British-born people who have acquired a different nationality may be classified differently in data sets depending on the definitions used. Another important difference is in commonly used measures of migration is that some measure migration flows and others stocks. The number of people moving into and out of the UK provide information on the flow of the population, while the number of non-UK born or non-British citizens resident in the UK at any given point in time provides a stock measure of immigration. So the number of immigrants resident in the UK at any given point of time. These differences in definitions mean that data on flows and stocks are not directly comparable. Let's have a look at some of these data sources now. I'll start with the UK census. The census is the most comprehensive source of information on the migrant population in the UK. It provides information both on flows and stocks of migrants by collecting information on previous address in the year prior to the census, and information on country of birth and nationality, which was asked in the census. So the nationality question was asked in the census for the first time in the 2011 census, which is the most recent census conducted in the UK. The census collects very detailed information about migrants. So it collects information on year of arrival in the UK, intent and length of stay, as well as a range of demographic and socioeconomic characteristics, for example, ethnicity, religion, nationality, employment, education, and so on. The main advantage of the census is that it allows detailed exploration of migrant characteristics through aggregate tables. So these give counts of migrants by demographic or socioeconomic characteristic for different geographies. And the level of geography in the census is very detailed. So it can be as low as 300 people, as in census output areas. Census outputs are also available in the form of census microdata, which contain a 5% to 10% sample of individual records from the census, and can be used to obtain bespoke tables about the migrant population in the UK. The main limitation of the census is that it is carried out every 10 years, so it quickly becomes dated. As I mentioned, the most recent census was carried out in 2011, so the data are already out of date. Many of the UK census data are available without registration via the Open Government license, and most outputs can be easily downloaded from the UK Data Service website. So you can see here the web address. The UK Data Service has a dedicated census website. Another main source of information on international migration in the UK is the Labour Force Survey. This is a quarterly survey of around 60,000 households living at private addresses in the UK, and provides the most detailed statistics on the UK labour market. It contains panel and repeated cross-sectional elements. Survey participants are interviewed in 5 consecutive waves, and it captures very detailed information about the migrant population. So it records country of origin, ethnicity, nationality, date of arrival to the UK, as well as key socioeconomic characteristics. And since 2010, it has also collected information on reason for migration. The main limitation of the Labour Force Survey is that some groups are underrepresented. For example, those who do not live in households, those who live in communal establishments. So, for example, students living in halls of residence, hostels, guest houses, and mobile home sites, which are frequently used by migrants, particularly temporary migrants. If you are interested in small geographies or detailed migrant groupings, you should use the annual population survey. So this is a survey that is obtained by merging data from 2 Labour Force survey waves and using data from the annual local Labour Force survey booths for England, Scotland, and Wales. The Labour Force survey can be accessed through the UK Data Service website as well. However, it is subject to different licensing conditions depending on the level of detail included. The general practitioner patient register can be used to measure migrant flows based on new GP registrations. So this is an administrative data source which is managed by the National Health Service, which holds information on all patients registered with GPs in England and Wales. People with a previous address outside the UK and those who have spent more than 3 months abroad, when registering with a local GP, are attributed a flag 4 identifier, which can be used to measure international migration flows. The key strength of the patient register is that it captures both children and adult migrants resident in local areas. One of the main limitations of this dataset is that it provides no information about the time between arrival and registration or about people who have left the UK. Migrants not registering with a GP obviously are not captured. So some groups of migrants, particularly short-term, young, healthy migrants, and particularly male migrants, who are unlikely to register with a GP as soon as they arrive in the UK, are likely to be undercounted. Another main limitation of this data source is that nationality and country of birth is not systematically collected. So if you find examples of studies who have used this particular data set, you will see that the analysis is mainly based on age and gender characteristics rather than nationality. The flag 4 registrations are updated annually and are available by local authority districts. So these are administrative areas in the UK with an average population of around 160,000. The data can be accessed online through the Open Government Data website, which you can see here. This website contains data published by central government, local authorities and public bodies. One of the main sources of information on migration in the UK is the International Passenger Survey. The International Passenger Survey is based on an annual sample of around 800,000 interviews of passengers passing through main UK ports and airports. The survey asks respondents about their migration intentions and captures migrants according to the United Nations definition of international migration. So those who intend to remain or leave the UK for more than 12 months. And this is the main strength of this data set. It is the only data source in the UK that measures both immigration and emigration. Survey participants are also asked about the main reason of migration, so it can be used to estimate migration for different groups of migrants, for example, student, family, and labour migrants. It includes information on nationality, sex, and age group. However, the main limitation of this data is the sample size. So of the 800,000 interviews, approximately 5,000 of survey participants are classified as migrants, which means that estimates of immigrants at subnational geographies are unreliable. The International Passenger Survey is also available through the UK Data Service website and is also subject to different licensing conditions depending on the level of detail included. And the last data set I wanted to discuss is the national insurance number registrations issued to foreign nationals, which are another administrative data source managed by the Department of Work and Pensions, covering those who intend to work or claim benefits or tax credits in the UK. National insurance numbers capture migration flows of those aged 16 or above at time of application by country of nationality, world area of origin, so this is just simply a groupings of countries, age and gender, and the range of geographies, including government office regions, local authority districts, and parliamentary constituencies. The main limitation of national insurance numbers is that they do not record length of stay. And there is no requirement for migrants to register for a national insurance number at time of arrival, so there might be a time lag from time of arrival to time of registration. National insurance number allocations to overseas nationals are available by calendar or financial year of registration and can be accessed online from the Department for Work and Pensions online cross-tabulation system through the web address shown here. One thing to bear in mind when using these data sources is that when we compare data on migration flows from different sources, we can see inconsistencies that exist at both the national and subnational level between estimates of migration flows derived from administrative sources and long-term international migration estimates derived from the International Passenger Survey, which I will talk about in the next slide. Although the differences between the various sources are driven by differences in definitions and coverage, data sources can be combined to improve migration estimation and provide a richer picture about immigration and its consequences in the UK. So this approach is used by the Office of National Statistics to derive long-term international migration estimates, which are the official estimates used on immigration, emigration, and then migration in the UK. The International Passenger Survey is the principal source of data used to derive long-term international migration estimates, but these combine other data sources to make adjustments for asylum seekers, visitor and migrant switches, and flows to and from Northern Ireland, which are not captured by the International Passenger Survey. So they are more robust than the International Passenger Survey estimates. You can access long-term international migration estimates from the Office for National Statistics website. The data is available at local authority level for the years 1990 onwards. In many cases, researchers also combine migration data to get a better understanding of migration flows to the UK. This paper by Arek Wisniewski, a colleague who is based at the University of Manchester, uses Bayesian models to estimate migration flows between Poland and the UK using labour force survey data to provide additional migration estimates and to validate other existing migration estimates in the UK. Combining migration data sources can also give a richer picture about the nature and consequences of migration in the UK. This report by the Home Office, which I co-authored, derives a typology of local authorities by combining different sources of migration, for example, national insurance number registrations, Home Office migration and asylum statistics, and long-term international migration estimates to better understand patterns of immigration in different local contexts, to help identify where immigration is likely to have a greater impact on social cohesion and public service provision. You can find examples of research applications using migration data from surveys on the UK Data Service website. Under publication and case studies, so you can see the tabs here on the left. This is a case study of a piece of research that looked at the impact of migrants on London, its workforce, and its economy. If you're interested in using administrative data, you can find information on interesting research applications using linked administrative data on the Administrative Data Research Network website. So this is the main point of contact for getting access to administrative data in the UK, particularly confidential data. And the last two slides of my presentation summarize the main strengths and limitations of the data sets I covered in the webinar. So this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Kitty. That was brilliant. So at this point, we'll pass over to Reinhard for his presentation. We'll just give a moment while we switch the screens. Okay.
Okay, so also from my side, welcome to all participants. I have to, before I start, I have to say I'm sorry I caught a cold over the weekend, so my voice is a bit off. My name is Reinhard Schunk. I work at the GESIS Leibniz Institute for the Social Sciences in Germany, in Cologne, and yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the data that we have, that we host here on migration at GESIS. So when studying migration, we can study it from at least 3 different perspectives. That is, we can study the actual migration process, that is asking who moves and why. We can study what is typically called immigrant integration or immigrant incorporation. That is relating to the questions, what happens after individuals, couples, or families have moved, usually with a focus on the receiving country. And then there's also the research topic that concerns attitudes towards immigrants, towards immigration, which deals with the question of how is immigration viewed by the population in the receiving country. Although these 3 topics overlap, and you will see this also in the data that I will show you in a few minutes, especially the first 2, I will concentrate my talk on data on immigrant integration. That has mostly to do with data availability. So if you're interested in finding out what data we host here at GESIS concerning migration, GESIS has a homepage dedicated to migration research, which gives a very nice overview on research and on the data that is available at GESIS. So what I'm going to present you in the following is just a very, very small overview of the data sets that we host here at GESIS and the research that is going on here. So this data, this web page then lists all the studies on migration and migration decisions that are hosted here at GESIS, the studies on immigrant integration, and the studies on migration-related attitudes. Let's start with migration and migration decisions. So regarding migration and migration decisions, there is very interesting historical data available at GESIS through the HISTAT, through HISTAT. If you go to the web page and then just choose the topic population or the German term Bevölkerung, you can access this information. It goes back quite a long time. So for instance, the study here 8551 contains aggregate data on emigration from Germany from 1820 to 2010, and similar data is also available for a lot of countries, immigration data for a lot of countries in South America, etc. So that might be very interesting for someone who's studying migration flows with a historical perspective. Now, regarding the topic immigrant integration, there are 3 studies that I would like to talk to you in a little more detail. These are only 3 examples. First, the 2000 family studies, migration histories of Turks in Europe, then the causes and consequences of sociocultural integration processes among new immigrants in Europe, and lastly, the Children of Immigrants longitudinal survey in 4 European countries, the CILS for EU. All these studies are hosted here at GESIS. The 2000 Families studies is quite an interesting study because it overcomes one of the main, let's say, challenges that studies on immigrant integration usually have, is namely they do not have a lot of information about what has happened in the country of origin before the migrants have moved. So this study was conducted and funded through the Norphase framework. It had two specific goals. First, to enable comparisons of migrants with a counterfactual group of non-immigrants in their country of origin, and then to study, obviously, immigrant integration processes, but also processes of intergenerational transmission across generations and boundaries. So the sampling is rather interesting. The usual way to conduct surveys on immigrant integration, or to conduct studies on immigrant integration, is to sample immigrants within the receiving country. Here, what they did is they sampled in the sending country. So they sampled the 2,000 Turkish men, 1,600 migrants, and 400 stayers, and then collected information on their family members too, in 9 destination countries in Europe, and also on return migrants. So this is quite a rich data set which captures the migration process as well as the integration process. All the data, as I said, are available through the data catalog at GESIS. So this is just how it looks like. Jen already pointed out how a data catalog looks like. So you have all the relevant information on the citation, on the content, on the methodology, the documentation, etc., available. So if you want more information on a study, that's a very, very good place to start. An interesting paper which was recently published, the European Sociological Review, using this data, investigated marriage migration to Europe, and what they found, what I find quite interesting, is that that marriage migrants often end up in non-traditional power relations, especially male marriage migrants. And marriage migration, which might not be that surprising, is much more likely if a family already has experienced family migration before, so marriage migration before, excuse me. So the second study concerning immigrant integration is the causes and consequences of sociocultural integration processes among new immigrants in Europe, which was also funded through the Norphase framework. It states 3 explicit goals, that is, describe differences and similarities of integration processes among different immigrant groups and different receiving countries. It aims to provide data to analyze the causal link between migrant sociocultural integration and other dimensions of integration. And lastly, to provide explanations for similarities or differences in integration trajectories. Excuse me. So this is actually a 2-way panel study which was carried out in 2010 and between 2010 and 2013. It covers first-generation immigrants in Germany, Great Britain, Ireland, the Netherlands, and major country-specific origin groups. Just as a side note, the study has varying sampling approaches in the different countries. It has information on pre and post migration, so the focus is on migration and integration. An interesting piece of work, also published in 2016 by Deal. They looked, using this data, they looked at how identification with the host country, the receiving country, evolved during the initial phase of immigration, and they looked at Turkish and Polish immigrants, which are major immigrant groups here in Germany. And what they found is that newly arrived Turkish immigrants, they start out with a substantially higher identification with Germany as a host country. than the Polish migrants. However, this reverses over time and even decreases for the Turkish immigrants. And Dil et al. Explained that with the stagnation of the social assimilation, the perceived discrimination, and the value incompatibility perceived on the side of the Turkish immigrants. The last study on immigrant integration I want to draw your attention to is the big Children of Immigrants longitudinal survey in 4 European countries, the CESSDA study. The data is available through the GESIS data archive. It's a very large study which, pardon me, sorry, with collaborators in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and England. It's a longitudinal study, and the first 3 waves were funded through the North Phase framework. However, the study continues now with national fundings. The study's goal was to provide data allowing the comparative analysis of the development of immigrants' progeny in the said receiving countries, that is Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, and England. It's a very rich study. It has a multi-actor design and network data. So what the study did is they sampled schools and classes, and then within these classes pupils. So they have information on immigrant students and non-immigrant students. They have information on the students' parents and also on the teachers, and they also included network data. So we know we have network information on the students within the class. So that is a rich, really rich data set. Not surprisingly, there are lots of research examples for this data set. You can, if you are interested, I recommend to go to the SILS4EU homepage. They list all the research conducted with the SILS4EU data. Just one small example that I found quite interesting by Geben et al. From 2016. So they looked at how ethnic composition relates to student problem behavior. And while usually when you look at ethnic composition and student outcomes, mostly in form of achievement outcomes, we typically find that ethnic composition, meaning that if there's a high proportion of immigrant students in a class, we usually find that this is detrimental for student achievement. However, what they found is that immigrant students display less problem behavior when the proportion of co-ethnics is higher in the school. So quite an interesting piece of work. Lastly, GESIS also hosts a lot of studies on attitudes towards immigrants. I urge you to go to the homepage dedicated to research on migration at GESIS and to go through the list. But I only want to draw your attention to the German General Social Survey, the ALBUS, because this contains information on immigration in a because this contains information on migration for a very long time, since 1980. And one piece of work that was also recently published asked the question, or let's say investigate the question again, how immigration and support for distributive welfare policies among the non-immigrant population relates. And what they did is, Schmidt, Katran, and Spies, they combined individual and regional level data from the ALBUS from 1994 to 2010, and they show in a very convincing way that that the native-born population becomes more reluctant to support welfare programs when the proportion of foreigners at the regional level increases. Good. I'm already almost at the end of my presentation. You can, if you are interested in finding out more about the data that we host here at GESIS on migration, And since the CESSDA data catalog is not yet online, you can do that either through searching through the data catalog at GESIS. I put the link down here below, and follow the tips that Jen gave you at the beginning. Or you can directly look at the website dedicated to migration research here at GESIS, where I think all of the data sets that deal with one of the 3 topics on migration are listed. So that was it from my side. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'd really like to say thank you to our presenters today. It's been a really interesting webinar.